From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. From the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock provides this week's insight on the cattle markets. She'll recap the USDA's latest cattle on feed and cold storage reports and how they'll reflect on the markets. Also, K-State's Brad White will talk about a new initiative to gather feedback from you livestock producers about the availability of veterinary services in your locations. This organized by the Rural Veterinary Workforce Development Task Force. Brad says that input is vital in addressing rural veterinary support shortages. And on this week's 4-H segment, K-State's Amy Sollock talks with Jeff Wickman about new 4-H project-report forms. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Thanks for joining us once more. As we take a look at the cattle markets, well, they're responding to all kinds of stimuli, to put it that way, and we'll get into that once again as we're visiting about the trades with Katelyn McCullock, who is the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center out in Denver. Katelyn, we'll get to eventually the cattle on feed report last Friday, but beginning with how the futures markets in particular responded to just astounding strength in the corn market. That was the eye catcher this past week.
It looks like the cattle and hog markets all took a beating on Thursday of last week, but live cattle were having trouble pretty much all week. I think they were starting to hear a little bit more about these high placement numbers coming out in cattle on feed, and so that was a factor as well. On Friday, feeder cattle and hogs both came back a little bit, where live cattle struggled a little bit more, but we are now looking at at least the nearby contracts for corn and soybeans being very, very high, and those cash prices have come up as well, and that just speaks to the tightness in both these markets ahead of the U.S. harvesting their new crop.
And the lingering question that nobody has an answer to yet is how much more strength could still exist in the grain trades. As long as there's doubt about that, will there continue to be pressure to bear on the cattle markets with that uncertainty?
That's a great question. From a fundamental perspective on the cattle side of things, and I know we're going to cover cattle on feed later, cattle supplies aren't overly burdensome. The feeder cattle market is going to be tossed around quite a bit by these feed costs, especially when you talk about drought in the U.S. That's something we're keeping a really careful watch on right now. We've seen dryness on the West Coast for that coastal grazing programs, dryness in the northern plains, and all of that's going to be contributing factors into, do you have forced placements on feed even if feed costs are very high because the grass just isn't out there? Some of that remains to be seen, but we did see probably some increased placements even in March from some of those factors.
Good segue into the latest cattle on feed report from the USDA. If one's looking for a sliver of good news for the cattle markets, it might be in that placements number.
So cattle on feed placements were up 28%, which is a big number, but it's actually quite a bit lower than what pre-reports thought. So the pre-report average was closer to 133. So that should be supportive of live cattle prices, at least on the futures market. Disclaimer here, I'm not necessarily telling you what to do with your hedging programs, but that is quite a bit lower than what pre-reports suggested. But it is misleading when we talk about these large year-over-year changes. March of 2020 was the lowest March on record, and that was because we were just starting to see those issues with the pandemic, starting to back up cattle. There was a lot of uncertainty in the market. And so when we look back comparing this March's number compared to 2019, it's actually down about 0.8%. So that puts a little bit of better context on that number. Now, one number we're also looking at is the cattle on feed number, which is up 5%. And that too is a fairly big number. However, I'm not really overly concerned about supplies at this point. I think feedlots are still working through some of those large third quarter placements that we saw in 2020. And those are probably going to work their way through that system within the next month or so and kind of clean up that on feed number a little bit. So not necessarily super concerned there. Now, with a large placement number of 28%, almost all the weight categories were above a year ago. The only one that was not was 1,000 pounds and higher. When we looked at cattle over 900 pounds that were placed, those were up 13%. 8 to 899 were up 30%. 700 to 799 were up 24%. Some of these are going to be wheat pasture cattle that came off and entered the feedlot in a relatively normal time frame. We did have some weather events, but there's nothing necessarily abnormal about that. But one of the couple of key things were the under 600 pounds category was up 31%. 699 pounds were up 48%. I do believe some of the depleted coastal grazing did force some of the lighter weight placements onto feed earlier than they would, as well as some of the northern plains dryness. Those are both very big areas of concern that would have probably held cattle longer, and that's just not going to be the case this year. And so that drought is an increasingly concerning picture when you look at the drought monitor. We'll be looking at pasture and range conditions, which are going to start being released in the May crop progress reports. That's a number we track every single week, and that's going to be critically important again this year.
The question about whether feedlots can remain current, well, a lot of variables in play here.
I'm not concerned with staying current. If we think about last year, we had so many other factors that forced cattle to back up, which I don't believe those factors will be of that magnitude. We also have a decline in the calf crop. And so we just physically shouldn't have as much cattle available as we did last year. And so both of those point to just longer term underlying fundamentals that shouldn't cause, an oversupply of cattle this year. Now, everything comes down to timing. And if we learned anything in the pandemic, it's that those things matter and can matter a lot in the short term. If you think about what's happening with box beef cutout right now, timing of supply and demand is probably going to be a bit choppy this year because you have so many things happening in the economy. You have restaurants opening up, you have people starting to travel again, and no one really knows what that at-home versus away-from-home consumption picture truly looks like. And it is expected to change, right? What it was in January is not probably what it's going to be in August. And possibly weather plays a factor if people can eat outside, vaccination rates, vaccination refusal, all those types of things are going to be a factor this year and aren't going to make the picture terribly clear, even as we necessarily move through this. But in terms of overall how much cattle we have available, we are expecting a decrease in production this year. LMIC's forecast is still down about 1%. That should help support cattle prices to some degree, especially in that fourth quarter is where we're looking at setting the high for the year still.
What about the boxed beef trade and how well it's faring? We've been remarking on its resiliency throughout the better part of the spring. What's happened of late there, Katelyn?
Well, on Friday, we continued to see negotiated choice box beef move higher. It came in at $283.77 and rounded out the week, making the weekly average over $280. 100-weight. Now, that's the sixth consecutive week of increases. And one of the more interesting pieces of this is how high the rib primal has gone, which I think is a lot to do with restaurant demand. It averaged $488 last week. Those are historically big numbers, not record high when you look back at 2020, but still very high by historical standards. The loin primal now, too, is above $400 100-weight. These are some very sharp demand shocks, but the other thing that's going on is that we have very strong spot market prices, which has a lot to do with these restaurants and things reopening, but we also have lower steer and heifer slaughter. So there is a production component in here to some degree. When you look at year to date, steer and heifer kill is down about 1.9%. Those factors are playing a role when we think about choice, prime, select graded steaks. That lower production is probably impacting it a little bit. Now, kills did step up last week, and so I would expect that piece of it to moderate a little bit. The other thing we're looking at is the choice select spread has narrowed incredibly. Demand for beef seems really, really strong at this point. And you're seeing those select values move to some pretty high levels as well.
Well, let's plug in here, Katelyn, the latest cold storage report from the USDA. It gives a perspective on beef supplies as well as those for competing meats. What did those numbers tell us?
So the March cold storage report from a year-over-year comparison is a little bit different because in cold storage, March of last year still probably hadn't seen a lot of backup, right? It was mostly in those slaughter plants, etc. You hadn't quite seen that yet. And so there's going to be some anomalies moving forward. But as of comparing to a year ago, I think it's safe to say that overall meat supplies are relatively tight in cold storage. Total chicken is down about 20% below a year ago. If we look at turkey, total turkey is down 10% from a year ago. If we look at the red meat categories, pork has continued to decline. It's showing much smaller volumes than last year. Total pork is down about 27%, but butts, picnics, and variety meats are all down more than 30% compared to a year ago. Beef in cold storage was down 4% in March. Beef cuts are down 8%, and boneless beef is down about 3%. So all of those inventory numbers suggest that we are seeing some very efficient movement in some categories through the meat supply chain. And that could be, too, what's causing some of these sharp price increases and sharp price reactions is that there's just not as much available right now in product in those warehouses.
Katelyn, you look at the supply and demand in play right now, it really is challenging to get a good, firm grip on what may transpire in the markets ahead. So cattle producers are going to have to be astute marketers, to put it that way.
Nimble is probably the word I would use.
Yeah. These are interesting times without question. And Katelyn, thanks for filling us in on all of that data and those observations. We'll talk again in a few weeks. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That input from the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock, who joins us regularly to talk about the cattle market developments here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today continues now as we'll take up a long-discussed issue in animal agriculture, the shortage of food animal veterinarians in our rural areas. Now, there have been attempts to address that over the years, and a new task force has been named to take up the issue as well. Kansas State University is a partner in that effort, and joining us now is Brad White, veterinarian here at Kansas State University and the director of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. He's involved in this. Brad, before we talk about the task force proper, what it's designed to do, the problem at hand, the availability of livestock health services in our rural areas, where does it stand currently in your view?
Eric, I think great question, and I appreciate you having me on. I think this is something that we have talked about for many years, and really our goal, and I work at K-State at the College of Veterinary Medicine, and our goal is to train students and set them up for long-term success. And as we look at rural veterinarians or veterinarians serving livestock producers, really thinking about the state of Kansas, we see there are some areas that there is pretty good coverage, and there are some areas where maybe that coverage could be a little bit better. And that's one of the reasons that we embarked on this path, is to try to do as well as we can at making sure we match the needs of the livestock producers with the veterinarians that are coming out of veterinary school.
Just for historical perspective, there have been attempts to, if nothing else, incentivize newly minted veterinarians to, in fact, take up practice in our rural areas, have there not?
Absolutely. So actually, there's a program called the Veterinary Training Program for Rural Kansas, is actually funded through the state, and it provides students going through veterinary school a loan that is then repaid when they spend time in rural practice. They spend at least 5 years in their rural areas, but the goal is that they're there long term. This program has been going 15 years, and over 90% of those students are still in rural areas, and most of them are still in the practice that they started. So we feel it's a very successful way to have students go out, become into a practice area, and serve livestock producer needs.
So that's working, but there's enough of a problem remaining that there needs to be more in some form or fashion, right?
Well, I think that's the question. And we really want to define this problem and figure out not only where geographically are the specific needs, but what are those specific needs, because we can incorporate that into our training program. So are there specific skill sets, things that producers need that they're not receiving now that we should focus on as we go through in training? So that's really what we want to do with this task force, is we want to come up with solutions, but first we're going to define that problem.
And by way of a survey, which we'll talk about, but who comprises this, by title, Rural Veterinary Workforce Development Task Force? A lot of players here, Brad.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this really generated from several different sources and from conversations among organizations, and it's a true collaborative effort. So we have the Kansas Livestock Association, Kansas Farm Bureau, Kansas Department of Ag, the Kansas Veterinary Medical Association, of course, the College of Veterinary Medicine, the College of Ag, and recently have added the Livestock Marketing Association. So a lot of different organizations that represent stakeholders across agriculture in the state of Kansas. And we've come together with the goal of, let's promote both development and retention of excellent veterinarians to serve livestock producers in Kansas. So that's our target. And as we think about that target, and as you can imagine, one of the great things about having that diversity in members of this workforce is we get to see a lot of different perspectives. And that's what's led us to say, you know what, let's really identify this problem, because all of these organizations are invested in making Kansas agriculture strong.
So as you suggested, the task force will go about some fact-finding here, wanting to hear from producers about those animal health needs in their locales. So you have, as the initial effort here, created a survey for producers. Talk about that, if you would.
Yep, absolutely. Our goal is find out from producers what are the real needs. And as I mentioned, anecdotally, and from what I've heard, we believe there are some regional differences within the state. It's not exactly the same in the need across the state. We also believe there are some service differences in what people need. So this survey, which is anonymous, but it is linked to geographic region, it only takes about 5 minutes to fill out. And we're really wanting to get a lot of producer feedback, because it will ask questions related to what kind of operation do you have, and then what services do you normally get from your vet, and what services would you like to get from your vet? So that survey feedback is going to be really useful at directing this task force. And we see it as kind of, it's going to write our roadmap to, here's the problem. Let's figure out exactly how we can come up with the solution. So if you're interested and can fill out this survey for us, it'd be really useful. The easiest way to get there is if you just go to the Beef Cattle Institute website, and you can just Google Beef Cattle Institute. It'll come right up, and there's a button on the top that says take the survey.
It's easy to access. We'll repeat that again as we go along here, but the survey is instrumental in this task force getting its job done. You suggested, though, Brad, that there are suspicions about some of the issues at hand out there. You might expand on at least what you perceive as some of the challenges in particular areas of the state.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually done some preliminary work where we've looked at where veterinarians that work on livestock are physically located across the state of Kansas. And if we plot a circle around each of those practitioners with a 45-mile radius, we see lots of areas of the state are overlapped by multiple circles, if you will, so multiple practice areas. although there are some areas as we get into western Kansas where it's less dense. So we see some differences in density of veterinarians. We've actually gone so far as to plot that against some of the cattle densities in the state. And we know, and I'm leaving the feed yards out here and looking at cow-calf because it's a little bit different. And we see that there are some differences, and we want to see if that aligns with our survey. So that will really be a key to us saying, and it'll allow us to maybe better direct, here's some real areas of needs in these communities.
The survey is, it sounds, largely aligned toward cattle health needs, but not exclusive to that. Is it interested in other species?
Oh, good question. Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at any agricultural species that if you are interested in, and especially as we look at veterinary services, so there are options on there for small ruminants. There's options on there for other species. So not just cattle focused. Of course, that's the first thing that comes to my mind, Eric, but that's not the only thing that we put on the survey.
Very good. And just to drum this home, Brad, how important is it for a good volume of response to this survey?
I think this is the opportunity to have your voice heard relative to your needs in your area. And we've got, as I mentioned, with the Kansas Livestock Association, Veterinary Medical Association, Farm Bureau, College of Vet Med, we've got a lot of groups that work on both sides of this equation, not just what do we put in the curriculum to make sure we're doing appropriate training, but also how do we work with those veterinarians in the field. So if you want to change the process, if you think there are some things we can do better, this is a chance to provide some feedback. So we'd really love to have a great volume of responses to this survey.
Well, it remains a high-profile matter of interest for Kansas agriculture broadly, the livestock industries more directly, the availability of high-quality, reliable health services for our livestock enterprises throughout all of rural Kansas. Do take the survey, producers, and as Brad says, one of the easier ways to access it would be at the BCI website, that is ksubci.org, and take the survey. It should take less than 5 minutes to complete, and as Brad says once more, all survey responses will remain anonymous. Go to ksubci.org and let them know about your perceptions of veterinary services in your locale. Very important cause right here. Brad, thanks for taking a few moments with us to talk about the issue and the survey. We'll catch up with you later on.
Thanks, Eric.
He's the director of the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University, veterinarian Brad White, and he's among several participating in this Rural Veterinary Workforce Development Task Force. K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine and College of Agriculture among the active participants in that initiative. And might as well mention while we're at it, if you'd like to know more about the animal health career opportunities that the College of Veterinary Medicine at K-State facilitates, we'd invite you to check out their excellent website. That is vet.k-state.edu. Tons of information there, vet.k-state.edu. You are listening to Agriculture Today. After the break, the agricultural news headlines of the day for you. And once more, standing by with this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman. So please keep it right here, won't you, on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network, now in its 97th year of broadcast service to agriculture here in Kansas and the Central Plains. Eric Atkinson here, and next up, today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. And to round out the story on that USDA cattle on feed report released on Friday, here are the Kansas numbers out of the report. Feedlots in the state held 2.48 million cattle, on feed as of April the 1st. The inventory up 8% from last year. Placements during the month of March, 490,000 head. That was up 42% from a year ago. And fed cattle marketings for the month of March, totaling 470,000 head, up 11% from 2020. The Biden administration's 30 by 30 plan to protect 30% of U.S. lands and ocean territory by the year 2030 is not a land grab, according to USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack. He told reporters it's really about utilizing public lands and private working lands in a commitment to conservation, in his words. He said the department is reaching out to farmers for suggestions about how to achieve the 30 by 30 and other goals, but that, in his words again, there's no intention to take something away from folks. He says rather the moves are focused on encouraging adoption of climate-smart practices. He also said the action to increase acreage levels enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program will not increase market prices for commodities. But the National Grain and Feed Association cautioned that drastically increasing CRP could result in negative climate impacts. Mike Seifert, the president and CEO of the NGFA, said that association believes the CRP should be targeted at the most environmentally sensitive portions of farms and avoid enrollment of whole farms or large tracts of productive farmland. Their contention that programs that drastically increase acreage idling in the U.S. send market signals to competitors to plant more acres, resulting in negative climate and environmental impacts. Some producers are asking questions now regarding how crop insurance works related to matters of climate and climate-smart agriculture. Here's a look from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Growers have several questions related to crop insurance and how it fits into climate considerations and climate-smart agriculture. USDA Risk Management Agency Chief Actuary Thomas Worth answered some of those questions at this year's AgriPulse Ag and Food Summit, including does insurance recognize risk reduction from conservation practices?
To the extent that a farmer adapts their practices to reduce risk, such as planting cover crops, they get better insurance coverage at a lower premium rate. In other words, we have what I would call a results-based discount for conservation or other practices, to the extent that these practices improve a yield, especially by reducing losses in bad years.
Also, how is crop insurance adapting to climate change? Examples include:
we do periodic reviews of weather and climate data with respect to sort of key program dates. For example, the early planting date. We're always looking at and making refinements to mapping out high-risk land like floodplains and so forth. Do those need to be revised in light of data or developments?
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The National Association of Wheat Growers has launched a new special climate and sustainability committee. This committee will work together to review wheat sustainability issues and guide the development of NOG policy priorities. The committee will report to the NOG board and will provide recommendations on policy options to the association's engagement in climate discussions. The committee is made up of current and past NOG board members representing a broad variety of production areas. One of the chairs of the committee is Justin Knopf of Kansas, and members from the Central Plains region include Brian Books of Colorado and Clay Pope of Oklahoma. A new video series is using personal stories to share how growing invasive feral hog populations are damaging agriculture, natural resources, and ecosystems. Once more, the USDA's Rod Bain.
Need something to binge watch?
Very possibly the most dangerous animal in the wild, and he knows no enemies and he knows no fear.
Go to YouTube, type in the search bar, Feral Swine in America, USDA. This series, developed by USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, chronicles the negative impacts of invasive feral swine, as told by ag producers, land managers, conservationists, and archaeologists, among others.
Their daily lives, their daily livelihoods are impacted by this invasive species, trying to protect their livelihood or protect natural resources.
Janine Nesky of USDA APHIS says 3 videos in the series are available for viewing.
We have Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Texas. In each of those, we do address different topics,
with more state and topic-specific videos expected later. This is part of APHIS's continuing efforts to educate the public about feral swine and collaborate with partners to control this invasive pest. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Want to take a moment to tell you here about something of interest to you crop producers and crop consultants alike. The 2021 Virtual Crop Scout School is now available. It's free. It consists of 22 webinars from crop protection specialists at 11 Midwest universities, including K-State, and is being offered through the Crop Protection Network. You crop scouts, farmers, and others can pick and choose from a variety of diverse subjects to help you become more knowledgeable on crop scouting. These topics are split into segments, so participants can interact with the subject matter in a way that best suits their time and their interest. 2 of our K-State specialists contributed to this webinar series. Weed management specialist Sarah Lancaster will be talking about grasses. Grass seedlings appear similar to each other while standing up, but get closer and you'll see that there are many different species common in crop and forage fields. In this webinar, Sarah will explain how to differentiate between the common grass weeds in crop fields. And K-State row crop disease specialist Rodrigo Onofre will be talking about identifying corn diseases in the field, which can be difficult. Some diseases require sending samples into a lab for confirmation. In this webinar, Rodrigo will share information that a crop scout should gather before heading to the field, as well as resources that help scouts gather that information. Now, earlier this year, this network released a free web book on crop scouting. It's entitled Crop Scouting Basics for Corn and Soybeans. It's available online, and it can complement this Scout School. And after taking all of this in, certified crop advisors can complete the corresponding quizzes to earn continuing education credits. You can find out more on all of this by going to cropprotectionnetwork.org. That's cropprotectionnetwork.org. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. In a moment, we'll hand it on over to Jeff Wickman as he'll have this week's Kansas 4-H segment.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Record keeping and project reporting are important skills that youth learn in Kansas 4-H. However, in order for those records to be accurate, they need to be documented in a timely manner. Southwest Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock says that new forms have been developed to improve the record-keeping process, which serves as a permanent record of their 4-H and non-4-H experience. Amy, there are some new report forms that we want to make people aware of because these deal with their project areas and ways maybe to keep them on track.
Yeah, we've developed new Kansas 4-H project report forms, which is a great record-keeping tool for them to keep accurate accord of all of their project experiences.
Talk a little bit about how this came about and how you were able to more or less revise some of the older forms.
Yeah, so the older forms, we referred to them as the KAP, the Kansas Award Portfolio, and those have been used for quite a while, at least 15 years or more, and they've kind of run their course, and they were no longer serving the purpose, and they weren't quite as relevant as they were when we initially created them. So we had received lots of feedback over the last 3 or 4 years that something new was needed, and so we developed a task force of folks from across the state, got a lot of volunteer input. We piloted them last year, and based on all that feedback, we really felt like we were headed in a good direction with these new project report forms.
So are these forms then that they print off, or are these forms that they can actually just use online?
Both. We understand that, internet connectivity is widely different from across the state from corner to corner, and we know some people have different comfort levels with different technologies. So the forms are available both in PDF, and you can work on them on your computer, or they are also available online as well.
So how do these forms then help the 4-H members? How do they really utilize these forms the best?
two new features on these project report forms that we didn't have in the past is, number one, we have a different form for different age levels. So it's not reasonable to expect an 8-year-old to fill out the same form that we are asking our high school age youth to fill out. And so we've got different versions of the forms that are geared towards different age levels. And then the other thing is we've split them out into two different types of forms based on the project area. So we have what we call the general project report form, which is for all non-animal related projects. And then we've got an animal project report form for any project that involves an animal. And that includes poultry and rabbits to livestock to dogs and cats. The forms really walk the kid throughout the year from goal setting all the way to awards and recognition.
And are they taking notes? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. So here's my take on it, and I'm also a 4-H parent. So we've printed out these hard copy. We've got them on the fridge to kind of keep a reminder for us to keep things going throughout the year. And we wrote our project goals after my son selected his project back in October, November-ish. And every time we do something, we jot it down in a pen and paper type format. Then once or twice we've sat down and actually updated the form online so that it's current and kept up. You know, my 7-year-old doesn't have the greatest of handwriting at this point. So that's the route we're taking. It can be done in any number of ways, whatever system works for your family. If you've got kids that want to keep track on their smart devices and they want to keep notes that way, if they want to do it, you know, pen and paper ways, if they want to log on each evening, you know, that they do something and enter it that way, it can be done a number of ways. It's just finding the system that works for your family to sort of track and record what you're doing in your project areas. You know, the other thing that I would say for parents and kids, especially older kids that are sort of trying to exercise some of that leadership and do some of this on their own, is to record the things as you do them. You know, these forms won't be collected or turned into your local extension unit until the end of the 4-H year in September, maybe 1st of October. But that doesn't mean that you should wait until August or September to fill them out. So a record report form is something that you track and record throughout the year as you're doing them. For example, we have a small animal weigh-in tonight, and my son is enrolled in the bucket calf project. So tonight I'm going to make a concerted effort to sit down with him and fill out, the calf's weight and the date that we weighed him and make sure that we put that in there as we do it so that we're not trying to remember what we've done for the last 12 months.
That will really help with the accuracy of the project, won't it?
Absolutely. That's another good point that I'd like to comment on. You know, over the years, people get competitive. Of course, there's some awards at stake with record books. And so the need or the feeling that the more the better, and that isn't necessarily the case. We want kids to just be accurate, be organized, and sort of give a thorough report of what they've done. We don't want it to be overinflated or overly wordy. We just want kids to record what they've done and then really reflect upon what they've learned. And that's that really rich quality and content that we're looking for. And what's great is when a child has completed, several years, they can look back, and it's really quite a body of work when they look at these report forms after 4 or 5 years, especially for the kids that, have been in 10 or 11 years. It's quite a significant reflection upon everything they've done within their 4-H project.
And I would imagine some of the older youth are able to use some of that background material for applications on scholarships and things.
Yep, that's where I was headed next. We have a lot of high school students and then into college who tell us over and over again how helpful it was to have these report forms or records to look back on when they were applying for different scholarships or college admissions, whatever job they're applying for. They already have this rich history of their experiences, what they've learned, the skills they've gained, and that is just an invaluable set of documents to have, at the ready when they come young adults.
The pilot project is over with, so the forms are the forms as they are now?
Yes. Yep. We've launched them statewide. They are being used across the state this year. We have a small pilot project that is continuing with kind of the online app version. Hopefully that will be launched statewide in the following year, where people can actually pull these forms up on their smart device and use it through an app. But that's only right now being piloted by a small number of units.
And these are all easy to find online.
Yes, they are. The forms are available on kansas4h.org, or as always, visit with your local K-State Research and Extension office.
That's Southwest Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock. Again, more information can be found at local extension offices and online at kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.